Hello everybody and welcome back to another video about predicting the Oscars. Only it's not going to be the traditional video that I do every month with a fancy graphic because it's Christmas time. I have been so swamped with work that needs to get done. And so I haven't exactly had the time to make those graphics, but what I have had time to do, something that I do every year that I don't usually show people, is I have made a graph that is charting the precursors, charting the nomination wins that each movie gets in each category. And usually this is just for my own benefit, but I'm going to share this with you today. And I will say that a lot of these details are probably going to be off. It's entirely possible that I forgot to count something or that I counted something twice, and it's also possible that by the time you see this video, the numbers will have changed. So don't get too hung up on the exact numbers of things. This is just a generalization to help us understand which way the critics in the industry are going to go. So with that said, I am going to cover each of the categories, and I am also going to let you know what my top 5 is, though I'm not going to have a graphic for everything. So with all that being said, let's start with Best Casting, and I don't have a ton of detail on this category, unfortunately. Next Best Picture has combined casting and ensemble precursors to figure out what might be happening in this category. And that's something that I thought about doing, but I decided to just stick to Best Casting because we don't know if casting necessarily means ensemble. In hindsight, I wish I had gone with the ensemble awards because I really have no information to go off of. I'm not going to use this as too much judgment, but what I will say is I think Sinners, One Battle, Hamnet are all in. I think Marty Supreme's in. And then the last slot, I think, is either Sentimental Value or Wicked for Good. I know that Wicked is no longer really considered a Best Picture contender, but the fact that it made this shortlist makes me think that it can get in because that means they're considering the casting for the first movie, which would have been shot back to back. And I think had this category existed last year, then the first Wicked definitely would have gotten a nomination here. So it's tricky. It's tricky. Sentimental Value could happen as well, and there's arguments to be made for the other contenders, but at the moment, I am leaning Wicked for Good in that last slot. So my contenders are Sinners, One Battle, Marty Supreme, Hamnet, Wicked for Good. For Best Documentary, I have a lot more to show you. There were a lot of big documentary precursors early on, so we have so many movies in consideration. By the way, the names that are in bold are the names that are shortlisted for the Oscar, and the names that are not in bold are ones that are not eligible to be nominated. So this category is so frustrating because Perfect Neighbor has been sweeping the precursors as I predicted it might, but we don't know if it's going to get nominated for the Oscar because it would not be the first time that the movie that's sweeping the precursors in this particular category gets snubbed. So I am still going to have it in, though, because if Perfect Neighbor does not get nominated, I genuinely don't know what's winning. This category is so unpredictable year in and year out. And so at the moment, what I'm going to say is Perfect Neighbor at number 1, and then Cover Up, 2,000 Meters to Andreevka, Alabama Solution. And then the last slot, I'm going to go way down and get something that technically only has one mention, and that is my Mr. Nobody Against Putin. Now, some of the ones that were not mentioned include Cutting Through Rocks and Folk Tales and Coexistence by Ass, and I could go with those, but I'm just waiting to see them get a little bit more support from these precursors. My Undesirable Friends is tricky because people say that it's really good, but it's also like 5 hours long. So I'm kind of shocked that the Academy is even considering it eligible. And if it does get nominated, I'm watching that one in chunks, let me tell you. But yeah, so I think that's my top 5. Perfect Neighbor, Cover Up, 2,000 Meters, Alabama Solution, and then Mr. Nobody Against Putin. Now, for international feature, it's the top 5. It's Neon Top 5, or as I like to call it, Oops, All Neon. It's funny, for the longest time, I doubted Surat. I sort of wrote that one off because they're not going to nominate 5 Neon movies. But Surat has been doing incredibly well as of late. As you'll see, there's a very big gap between Surat and the number 6 contender, which is Left-Handed Girl. And even though that film and Voice of Hind Rajab have been doing well, they've gotten a few mentions here and there. And actually, nobody has mentioned President's Cake yet, which is shocking because a lot of people thought early on that that was going to get in. And Surratt did so well on those Oscar shortlists, and it makes me feel that if there's a movie vulnerable here, it might actually be No Other Choice, because that didn't do nearly as well on the shortlists. Even though a lot of people really love that one too, there's also talk about Park Chan-wook. He got ignored for his last movie. The Oscars always tend to ignore him, but he can't ignore this one, right? Right? We're all sort of crossing our fingers here. But I do think this is going to be the top five. I also think It Was Just an Accident is most likely going to win. But really, this top five is so strong that any of them could have won in a different year. So my top five is It Was Just an Accident, No Other Choice, The Secret Agent, Sentimental Value, and Surratt. For Best Animated Feature, this is another category where the top five seems very secure. But let's talk about the winner for a second, because K-Pop Demon Hunters is by far and away the frontrunner with the critics' precursors, which is honestly really surprising to me. I thought this was going to be the movie that the critics wouldn't like as much, and they would gravitate towards something like Arco or Little Amelie. But not only is K-pop winning the vast majority of critics' awards, but second place is Zootopia 2, which is really unexpected for what the critics usually do, which tells me, A, Arco and Little Amelie are well liked, but neither one has a ton of passion behind them, or B, the two movies, there's no clear consensus on which one is better. So K-pop does seem to be the frontrunner for now. I am still a little bit concerned because it's not eligible for BAFTA, and we'll see what happens with that category, but my gut is saying that this is going to be a sweep for K-pop. Now, the top four seem very well secure, but unlike with international feature, I'm less confident in fifth place here. Elio, I know it's weak. I know it's weak, and I know it didn't do well at the box office or on Disney Plus, and I know that Pixar is not really doing a great job of campaigning it. I know that. And yet, if that fifth slot is not Elio, then what is it? In Your Dreams has gotten okay reviews, but it seems to be very juvenile. Demon Slayer, pretty good reviews, really good box office, but it seems like the sort of thing that if Oscar voters aren't caught up on the story and the lore of that franchise, then they're not going to understand what happens in the movie. And so nothing else really stands out. They could go completely off the rails with something like Endless Cookie, I guess, but honestly, I think Pixar has so much goodwill in the animation branch of the Academy that they're just going to default to nominating Elio. That is what I believe for now. So moving on to Best Sound. So this is another shortlisted category, and you will see that Warfare did quite well in the precursors, but did not make the shortlist. I do believe Sinners and F1 are in the top two positions. I'm not entirely sure which one is going to win, though. One Battle makes sense, and I'm maybe going on a bit of a limb, but I feel like Avatar is a solid fourth place. And then that leaves me with the last slot, which could be either Frankenstein or Surratt. And I've sort of gone back and forth with this one for a while. I do think Surratt makes a very compelling case for itself based on its showing at the precursors. But I don't want to have too many non-Best Picture nominees in this category. They do tend to gravitate towards Best Picture nominees. And so for that reason, I am going to go for Frankenstein in the fifth slot. Though again, I reserve the right to change my predictions before the nominations come out, which will be in about a month from today. So it's very, very nervous. For Best Original Song, this is another category where we seem to have a pretty solid top five. Golden, I Lied to You, Train Dreams, and Girl in the Bubble. Those four got in at Golden Globes and Critics' Choice, which are really the most important precursors that there are. And then Diane Warren has proven time and time again that she does not need precursors to get the nomination, so just add her to that top four. The only one that I think could be a little bit vulnerable is Girl in the Bubble, but if you look at the other contenders like Drive or like the other Sinners song or the other Wicked song, none of these really stand out to me as something that could happen. Maybe there's that Brandi Carlile one from the documentary, but I just don't see enough passion for it. I do think this top five is secure, so I see no reason to change that. For Best Original Score, And this is where we start getting a little bit trickier. So, as you can see, Sinners is winning by a pretty substantial margin, which is interesting to me because I was thinking that One Battle After Another was going to really contend for the win here because Johnny Greenwood has never won and Ludwig Göransson has 2 Oscars. But it seems like Göransson is headed towards his third, with music being such an integral part of that movie. Now, in terms of the other nominations, I think Hamnet is solidly in, and Frankenstein, they have snubbed Desplat a lot recently, but for now it makes sense to have him in there. And I'm just gonna put Marty Supreme in that last slot. I know that between F1, Tron Ares, and Surratt, they're all in the conversation to some extent, but they all have this techno beat thing to it that music score doesn't really the music branch doesn't really like that, and with so many scores like that competing for that fifth slot, I feel like they're all going to miss. F1 could potentially get in, but I just don't know. I wouldn't rule out Begonia or Train Dreams in this category, but I wouldn't look too far beyond the top contenders for possibilities here. Visual effects is where things get really, really hard. So we all know Avatar is winning, even if it's not in picture. And then Superman and F1, I have both of those locked in, but those last 2 slots have eluded me for such a long time now. And now that we know movies like How to Train Your Dragon and Fantastic Four are not going to be in contention, I mean, you'll see that the precursors suggest that Frankenstein and Sinners are going to do very well. And I feel like we're going to have one Best Picture nominee in contention, but the visual effects branch has shown, more so than any other branch, that they don't just default to the Best Picture contenders, and they do think a little bit outside the box. So currently, I am starting to think that Sinners can get in, but I doubt that Frankenstein could get in. I think the effects in Frankenstein were nothing that special, and I would struggle to see that getting in. I do think the last slot is going to be something like Tron Ares, just because it did pretty well on the shortlist overall. I could also maybe see Lost Bus getting in, but that movie feels pretty forgotten. So it's not a terribly deep pool of contenders, even of the 10. I think a lot of these movies feel like they're going to miss. I don't see Electric Slate or Jurassic World or Wicked contending at all. And then we have makeup. Oh my gosh, I have no idea what to do in this category. I know the top 4. I think Frankenstein's winning. I think Sinners, Smashing Machine, Wicked. In a different year, you could argue against one of those 3, but I feel like they're solidly in this year. And then nothing else that's shortlisted has gotten a single precursor mention. And so I guess you could say One Battle After Another because it's the Best Picture frontrunner and it can just get this nomination with everything else it's getting. But the only notable makeup in that movie is Sean Penn's face at the very end. And is that really enough for a Best Makeup nomination? I mean, some people are going towards The Ugly Stepsister, and I don't know. I feel like not that many people were talking about that movie this season. And I technically, after The Substance won last year, I shouldn't be so quick to write off body horror. I do think The Ugly Stepsister is hurt by the fact that it's not a across-the-board contender like The Substance was. But maybe after The Substance, more voters are inclined to watch a body horror film. I don't know. I've heard interesting arguments for Kahuku, but The Alto Knights and Nuremberg just don't feel very well. Marty Supreme, another Best Picture contender, but what makeup is in that film? I just have no idea what I'm going to say for that 6th slot. I guess for now I'm just going to default to One Battle because I have no idea what else to put there. But man, that could very easily change by the time I do my final predictions. Costume design. Okay, so Sinners, Wicked, Frankenstein, Hamnet. I feel like those top 4 are locked, and then that last slot, well, they have Hedda at 5th place, and honestly, I'm okay with that. I think Hedda makes a lot of sense. Testament of Ann Lee has been failing a lot. It didn't even get mentioned at the Costume Designers Guild, which is a big, big fail for that movie. I guess something like Kiss of the Spider Woman could surprise, but that movie also feels kind of dead. At least Hedda is showing up places. So I'm going to default to Hedda in that 5th slot because I don't really know what else to do. For production design, I think I'm also going with the default top five here. Frankenstein, Sinners, Hamnet, Wicked. And then I'm going to say Marty Supreme in the last slot. I'm not super confident about that. But you look at these other contenders, Phoenician Scheme, maybe, but the Academy has not gone for Wes Anderson in so long. And the Fantastic Four, I was really surprised by the mentions that movie was getting early on. And I started to wonder if that could be a possibility because it would be a cool nomination. But the fact that movie missed the shortlist for visual effects and score makes me feel like the Oscars are just not that big a fan of it. It would be really cool if it happened, but I don't think it's going to. I'm leaning towards Marty Supreme for now. Cinematography, again, another tech category where we're seeing a lot of the same names being repeated here. Sinners, One Battle, Train Dreams, Frankenstein, Hamnet. I think that is a solid top five, but I could see F1 or Marty Supreme making a case for it. I'm sorry that I haven't had much to say about a lot of these tech categories, but it does feel like they're going to go with the same default movies in a lot of them, which makes this last tech category very, very interesting to analyze. Best film editing. Okay, so One Battle and Sinners are getting nominated. Marty Supreme is probably getting nominated. F1, you know, every so often they do go with a non-Best Picture nominee here. And the more people keep shouting out F1, the more sense that does make to me that F1 would be the non-Best Picture nominee that gets in. But here's our problem. Of the remaining films that are in the Best Picture conversation, a lot of them do not have very flashy editing. And I could go with something way out of the box, but are they really going to have two non-Best Picture nominees here? So No Other Choice is fifth place here. And I guess I could see that happening, but if it's not in Best Picture, I feel like they're going to go with something a little more flashy. Like House of Dynamite has been showing up a lot of places. Maybe I'm just really surprised every time House of Dynamite gets any mention this season because I thought that movie's awards chances were dead. But some people are making the case for it in editing, and I guess I could see it. It is a very flashy film, but the big problem that most people have with that movie is the structure of it, and editing obviously plays a role in that. So I would just personally really, really struggle to see House of Dynamite getting in. And then, okay, when Critics' Choice nominated The Perfect Neighbor, that was a really, really inspired nomination. And I would love to think the Oscars could be cool enough to do something like that. But the fact that nobody else has singled that movie out does concern me. If more people were shouting that out as a possibility, then I'd consider it. But for now, I'm just going to default it to Hamnet in that last slot simply because it's a top Best Picture contender. Best Adapted Screenplay. So it looks like we have 6 main contenders, and I'm going to default to the top 5 here. One Battle, Hamnet, Train Dreams, I think they're all solidly in. Begonia could miss, but it's a very writerly film, so it makes sense. And then that last slot is either No Other Choice or Frankenstein. And I know a lot of people are making the case for Frankenstein, but I just have such issues with the writing of that film, and I think No Other Choice makes the most sense. Outside of that, I will say it is a shame that people are not really considering Wake Up Dead Man, because I personally think that's maybe my favorite film of the trilogy, and it would be a worthy nominee. But it feels like people are just kind of over this franchise at this point. And Life of Chuck would be cool, but that movie, Neon's got so many other eggs in this blanket that is not the saying at all, but they have other things to worry about. So I do think No Other Choice is getting in, and this screenplay nomination is what makes me feel No Other Choice is still safely getting a international nomination. Because it's going to get that one other nomination. We could get all of the 5 international nominees from Neon getting other mentions elsewhere. So that could be really cool to see. Original screenplay. So this is interesting. So Sinners, it was just an accident. Marty Supreme, Sentimental Value. Those top 4 feel really secure. And then that last slot. Jay Kelly was originally what I was going to go with here, but that movie has been falling lately, and I don't know how much faith I should put in it. I feel like they're going to go out of the box with that last slot, and they could go with either Sorry Baby or Weapons. Weapons is more possible, I feel, than I'd like to admit. And yet, I love Sorry Baby, and seeing it get this much attention from Precursors does give me hope. It got in a Critics' Choice. I think it can happen. I think there could be just enough love that Sorry Baby can get that last slot. Again, Weapons is very possible, but I think Weapons might be a little bit too genre. And Sorry Baby is just... I also don't want to say J. Kelly can't happen, or If I Had Legs That Kick You can happen. Even Blue Moon, I think, is very much in the conversation. I guess Secret Agent is a possibility, too. The top 4 is very, very secure. I'm going to lean towards Sorry Baby, but that is very much a hope prediction. And again, I reserve the right to change my prediction later. And now we finally get to talk about the acting categories, starting with Best Supporting Actor. Oh gosh, I've been waiting a while to talk about this category. So I think we all assumed for the longest time that this category would be a race between Sean Penn and Stellan Skarsgård. What I don't think anybody could have predicted is that Benicio del Toro would not just be leading in critics' wins, but leading by a sizable amount. The critics really, really love Benicio del Toro. And I think a lot of us were very confused when this started happening. I mean, Del Toro is obviously good in the movie. He'd be a solid nominee, but is he going to win the Oscar for that performance? And here's my line of thinking here, because it reminds me a lot of what happened with Jamie Lee Curtis when she overcame Stephanie Hsu, who was giving a much showier performance in the same film. But I think at least with that instance, you can say, well, it was a career Oscar. Jamie Lee Curtis is so beloved in the industry for so long, and people wanted her to have an Oscar. Benicio del Toro already has an Oscar, so why is there this sudden swell of support for him over Sean Penn, who's doing so much more in that movie? And I think what's going on is it's bias against villains. This is something that I've noticed recently, is that we obviously had that run of Javier Bardem, Heath Ledger, Christoph Waltz in the late 2000s, and then J.K. Simmons a few years after that. But it has been a while since a straight-up villain was the winner in a supporting acting category, which does make me... That's part of the reason why I don't think Amy Madigan is winning the Oscar, but we'll get to that in a minute. And Del Toro is good in the movie, but it is weird that he's taking so much. And maybe once we hit the televised precursors, we'll see if this continues. But I was starting to think that Sean Penn might be vulnerable for that reason. And I was actually starting to lean towards Stellan Skarsgård winning for sentimental value, even though that is pretty blatantly a lead performance, in my opinion. Now, in terms of who's going to win the Oscar, that's something that we can figure out later. But the nominations, it seems like Del Toro, Penn, Skarsgård, and Mescal are in. Elordi is technically ahead of Mescal on the sheets, but Elordi and Sandler have gotten those last 2 slots at Golden Globe and Critics' Choice. But Delroy Lindo is also in the conversation, but that might just be a critics thing. He hasn't gotten a televised nomination yet. And so I do think the 3 of them are gunning back and forth for the nomination. And I am at the moment leaning towards Elordi, but I do think both Lindo and Sandler are possible. And it is a shame that J. Kelly is not doing as well as we thought it was going to, but I feel like if that movie can get anything, it can get a lone nomination for Sandler, because he's been in the industry for a long time and people love him. And I was just watching the Schaefer Ellis video on Sandler's filmography, and he brought up something that I hadn't considered before. Adam Sandler's films, only one movie he's ever made has gotten an Oscar nomination, and it's Click. And that feels wrong, and I feel like that is something that should be corrected with at least one nomination for J. Kelly. Outside of that, I don't think there's a ton of other contenders outside of the top 7. And then we have Best Supporting Actress, and oh boy, once again, the person winning the most precursors is not the person that I'm currently thinking is going to win the Oscar. Amy Madigan in Weapons, I've talked about this performance at great length before. And it seems like the critics' precursors are very, very keen on making this an actual thing. But see, in terms of who can win the Oscar, I'm thinking it's Tiana Taylor or Ariana Grande, with maybe Madigan as a possibility. But I think Grande is not entirely out of the woods yet. Even if her film is not getting into Best Picture, Amy Madigan's film is definitely not getting into Best Picture. And we now know that it's not getting a makeup nomination either. A screenplay nomination is possible, but it does feel like chances are, if she gets nominated, she's going to be the lone nominee for her film. And she might not even get the nomination, to be perfectly honest with you. I'm starting to wonder if Weapons is this year's Challengers, is that movie that film Twitter loves, and they keep trying to make it a thing, but ultimately it can't crack the nominations at the Oscars. And it is close. I could see her getting the nomination, but I think the win, because of what I said earlier, they don't like villains, and the movie is just not going to be the Academy's overall cup of tea, at least with Wicked for Good. We know that it's getting more nominations outside of Grande, and we know that Grande was nominated last year and could have won. There could be an overdue narrative behind her. Some people don't think Zoe Saldana should have won. They could see this as a makeup win. But I ultimately don't think Grande is winning. I am leaning towards Tiana Taylor because she's in the Best Picture winner. But I will say, though, in predicting the nominees, I think it's Taylor, Lilius, Grande, Fanning, and Mosaku. I'm really, really starting to think that Wunmi Mosaku can happen. I know I've sort of ignored her for a large part of the season, but she is showing up almost everywhere, and that gives me a lot of faith into thinking that she can get the nomination. But Madigan can also get the nomination, and I could see a world where the person who misses is Elle Fanning, because the general consensus is that Lilius is giving the better performance in that film. I don't think either of the Marty Supreme actresses are going to contend, and Odessa A'zion has gotten on a lot more places than Gwyneth Paltrow. I just want to point out, if Glenn Close were in conversation for Wake Up Dead Man, it would be a more deserving Oscar win than Amy Madigan, in my opinion. So it's a shame that that's not happening. And Madigan, the other factor too, a lot of people keep saying, well, she's a previous nominee, so she has a career narrative. Amy Madigan is not Demi Moore, okay? She's not someone who was huge in the 90s. She's someone who, when I asked my parents about, they could not tell me off the top of their head who she was, and I had to be like, oh, she was the wife in Field of Dreams. Oh, yeah, her. So she's not like a big name, and I know a lot of people really, really want to believe that Madigan can happen, but, and I want to clarify, I don't think the nomination is out of consideration. I think the nomination can happen. But I just can't envision her actually winning for that performance. So my top 5, Taylor, Lilius, Fanning, Grande, Mosaku, with Madigan as a strong contender. Best Actor. So now we come to a category with a pretty clearly defined top 6, and we just have to figure out who is getting left off. And if you look at the person who is winning the most precursors, it's Michael B. Jordan, which is kind of crazy, because even when months ago when I thought Sinners could win Best Picture, I did not have Michael B. Jordan getting nominated. But now the consensus seems to be that Jordan is getting nominated and could potentially win. Chalamet has picked up a few things. He's solidly in the hunt, but he doesn't seem to be sweeping everything the way you would expect him to be for this kind of performance. DiCaprio's getting a lot, Hawke is getting a lot, Edgerton is getting a lot. The person that the critics have in 6th place is Wagner Moura, but I can't take him out, otherwise the Brazilian hive mind would kill me. So I have to figure out someone else to take out, and my gut is saying to take out Jordan, which feels so bizarre, but I don't know. It's kind of hard to say. I think that everyone else makes a lot of sense. Hawke, granted his movie isn't really in Best Picture, but it could be. Sony Pictures Classics is campaigning him very hard, and I keep hearing people suggest that Hawke could actually win this whole thing, and I am very tempted to take out Wagner Moura, but I'm not going to. Instead, I'm going to say it's Chalamet, DiCaprio, Hawke, Edgerton, Moura. I think Edgerton is very, very good in Train Dreams, and I have a lot of faith in Train Dreams to do well overall. So I guess I'm going to take out Jordan for now, but it's really, really close. And I don't know if anyone else can get in. Dwayne Johnson's gotten in more places than I thought, as has Jesse Plemons. Lee Byung-hun, I was thinking maybe for a while he was possible, but that movie has fallen. I really do think it's gonna be the top six, and we just have to figure out who in that top six is missing. Best Actress actually seems a little bit easier to figure out from our current vantage point, because for a long time it was a top seven and we didn't know how to juggle the contenders, but slowly but surely, two contenders started to drop out of consideration. Cynthia Erivo and Amanda Seyfried looked really, really promising for a time, but the two of them, their films just aren't as strong as they were once perceived to be. And so I think the nominees are going to be Jessie Buckley, Renate Reinsve, Rose Byrne, Chase Infinity, and Emma Stone. I do think Byrne is now solidly in. Even if the movie doesn't get in anywhere else, the critics have really, really been going to bat for her to the point where she has more support in the race than Jessie Buckley does. And I don't think that means she's going to come for Buckley's Oscar. I still think Buckley is winning. But this does show me the critics are doing their job to keep Byrne in the conversation. And it's kind of crazy that of all the acting categories, the person who is listed as number one is not the person who is perceived as the front runner to win, at least in my mind, but is the person who is really, really needs this support to be in consideration. And so I think Buckley's in, I think Reinsve and Byrne, yeah, it just makes the most sense to me. I know Jennifer Lawrence is also getting a lot of stuff, but I really think that's a critics only thing. And Kate Hudson in Song Sung Blue is not getting a lot of stuff, despite what Matt Neglia would have you believe. Best Director. I've talked about this in previous videos that the top six seems very, very strong, and there is a question of who is getting left out. Well, that still seems to be the case, but I actually do have to agree with what the precursors are saying. I think Trier is a very, very close number six. And I also think Guillermo del Toro makes a strong argument for being the number seven in this race, and one could make a case for him getting nominated, but I personally don't think it's going to happen. I think Anderson, Zhao, Panahi, Coogler, Safdie, I think that is your top five. Okay, and that brings us at last to Best Picture. Now, I am kind of breaking my own rule in terms of how I'm organizing these things because One Battle After Another technically has one less nomination than Sinners, but really only because I'm counting the Astra Midseason Awards. But it is clearly the frontrunner to win Best Picture. I don't think anybody can argue with that. It has twice as many wins as Sinners. Although, what's funny is that outside of One Battle and Sinners, nothing else has a Best Picture win anywhere. I mean, nothing. If I'd Like to Kick You has something from like the Women's Guild of Film Critics or something, but I don't really count that. Hamnet has nothing. Money Supreme has nothing. Train Dreams has nothing, despite doing pretty well with a lot of other precursors. And this tells me that these two are the only movies that could win Best Picture, even though One Battle is most likely going to win. If One Battle had not come out this year, then Sinners would be our next Best Picture winner, which is kind of a sobering thought because I love One Battle. It's a great movie, but Sinners winning would have been so cool, and it's a shame that we don't get to see that narrative take place, most likely. But One Battle has everything it needs to, and it's going to go down as a great Best Picture winner. Now, in terms of what's getting nominated, we have a solid top three in One Battle, Sinners, and Hamnet. I think Marty Supreme is solidly at number 4, and I think it was just an accident in sentimental value. Yeah, they're both in consideration. Frankenstein, I'll put that at number 7, despite my personal misgivings against the film. And Train Dreams, I have been feeling a lot more confident about that. It's placing really high on a lot of critics' precursors. It's getting everything it needs to. It missed the Globe, technically, but it's doing really well. So that gives us a top 8. And according to this, the last contenders would be Weapons and Sorry Baby. I think Sorry Baby is too small to be a real contender in anything beyond screenplay. That's just my opinion. And Weapons, there was a moment when I thought about it, but That movie is also Warner Brothers, who has the top 2 contenders for picture, so I don't think they'll be able to give that movie too much of a push. With that said, I think Begonia is in 9th place, which feels weird, but that movie, I think it's getting into screenplay and I think it's getting into actress. And with those 2 nominations, it has a pretty realistic path to get into Best Picture. And then I have to figure out what's getting that 10th slot. Now, what makes this year so tricky is that most years, all of the big studios have at least one movie that is solidly in the conversation. And that's not really the case this year. You look at Searchlight Pictures, they were supposed to have Rental Family as their big push, and that fell through. And then they sort of switched tactics to The Testament of Anne Lee, which I'm sure seemed like a good idea at the time, but that movie has just been flopping hard. And so now they really don't have anything. And then you look at Paramount, they had both Springsteen, Deliver Me From Nowhere, and Avatar, Fire and Ash, and I'm sure they thought at least one of them would be a Best Picture contender, and that does not seem to be the case for either one. And then you look at Universal, who started the year so confident that Wicked for Good, they didn't even need to get anything else. That was going to be their player, and that has not worked out well for them either. So we have all of these big major contenders that really don't have a horse in the race. And then there's Neon that has like 5 horses in the race. It's a little unfair, to be honest, that all of the best movies of the year, Neon has all of them. And for months, I insisted that Neon could not get 3 movies in Best Picture. And then I started to wonder, now I'm wondering if it's possible Neon could get 5 movies in Best Picture, because they're all so strong. But I think no other choice. It got the Golden Globe nomination. It's in consideration. But I am going to go with Secret Agent in that 5th slot as Neon's 3rd title. And I'm not super confident about it. But I look at so many of the other contenders and I don't really feel like they have what it takes. I mean, Wicked missed Golden Globe, Testament of Anne Lee missed Golden Globe, Jay Kelly missed Golden Globe. All 3 of those considered major contenders, they all missed. And you look at the ones that did make the Golden Globe, Nouvelle Vague feels like such an afterthought. Netflix has all these other contenders, and Nouvelle Vague really isn't a contender to get in any other category outside of maybe cinematography. So I just don't think there's a path for that film. But the other Richard Linklater movie that got a surprise Golden Globe nomination, Blue Moon, that might be in consideration because it's Sony Pictures Classics. And they pulled off a miracle last year with getting I'm Still Here into Best Picture, even if that was also a large part of the Brazilian hive mind's doing. And so I wouldn't entirely rule that one out. Plus, we know that Ethan Hawke is a contender. And also, Wicked for Good, I feel like maybe we shouldn't completely write that one off because it is the only thing that Universal has. We know it's getting multiple below-the-line nominations and Ariana Grande, and it got in a lot more shortlists than I was expecting. So maybe don't completely rule that one out just yet, but it's close. So my top 10 for picture goes like this. One Battle, Sinners, Hamnet, Marty Supreme, It Was Just an Accident, Sentimental Value, Frankenstein, Train Dreams, Begonia, The Secret Agent. It is close. It is close. But at this point, we're about a month away from the Oscar nominations, and there's definitely a lot of time for things to change. We'll see who gets nominated at SAG, we'll see who wins Golden Globe and Critics' Choice, and we will get the shortlist for BAFTA. Unfortunately, we won't get those nominations until after the Oscar nominations are announced. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Kwanzaa, all of that good stuff, and Happy New Year. I probably won't make any new videos until after the New Year, so but I just wanted to get this one out there to sort of talk about the state of the race. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Take care.